The 1917 women's strike in Petrograd, spark of the Russian Revolution.
The February Revolution, which was one of the most unexpected revolutions, was a hard and disastrously eventful time. Many were frustrated with the rulers and the way they were treated. There had previously been riots in Russia earlier that year, but not nearly as large or effective as this one. The day of the revolt started in the city of Petrograd, which is now present-day St. Petersburg. Strikers quickly gathered, revolting against the Romanov dynasty. It was not previously planned, nor were all the strikers from one certain organization. After the first riot, people would assemble during the night and gathered others to join in on the next riot that was taking place the next day. Factory workers were vastly annoyed by the loss of jobs throughout the city and the food shortages. The strikes went on for days, and though at first they were not at all to be a threat, as time went on, the Tsar lost more and more control of the mobs. Tsar Nicholas II was the leader during the time of the revolutions. He was the last of 3 centuries of Romanov rule. He eventually tried to give up the throne and give the power to his brother, who refused it, sending the monarchy out of power. Without their government, the people of Russia saw the opportunity to create a new branch of government, which eventually led to the creation of the Soviet Union.
Before the riots and the changes in the government, the women of Russia had it hard, having to wake up early every morning, sometimes before 3 a.m. to stand in bread lines because of food shortages. Most of the women also had to work long shifts during the day, which added to their hours without rest. The day of the strike, the lines for bread were longer than usual because of rumors that rationing would soon be imposed. Everyone wanted to buy extra bread that day so they could save the leftovers that they had. Even though bread could turn stale over time, they knew that if they made a dish called sukhariki with bread, that it could last for weeks. Tens of thousands of women showed up to buy bread that morning, and everyone knew that even if they were lucky enough to get any bread, that they wouldn't be able to get more than a few rolls. The fact that most knew that they wouldn't be able to make it to the front of the bread line before the bread was sold out was distressing to them. Many had families to feed, and they knew they would surely starve without the bread. Foreigners to Russia usually got special treatment on normal days, and would be able to get more bread in a shorter amount of time than the citizens. But even they were out of luck this day, having to wait hours until they could get anything, and even then it was only a roll or two. Even though women were patiently waiting for their turn, their patience eventually ended.
On February 23, 1917, it was the International Women's Day, which to most Russians was considered a minor holiday. In previous years, some of Russian socialists would create small riots in favor of anti-government and anti-war, but because of the recent food shortages and the labor protests, they were too preoccupied with their recent affairs to continue their annual plans at all that year. Most assumed that there would be few to no protests. The citizens of Petrograd were instead extremely angered with long working hours and low wages that were too small to even feed their families. The women were worried and frustrated with not knowing for how much longer they would be able to support their families alone, since the men of their families were off at war. They would go days without having any bread they could eat, and when some were fortunate enough to get 2 loaves of bread, someone would cry for being so overjoyed. By this point, people were starting to realize how wrong this was, and they were deciding to take action and show their government how bad their lives had turned out to be.
The struggling women were the ones to take action, instead of the wealthy men that weren't away at war. Over 7,000 refused to work that day and poured into the streets of Petrograd, holding signs and screaming bread over and over again. By 10 a.m., 20,000 joined, and before noon there were well over 50,000 women marching through the streets. They soon brought in political views and held signs saying "Down with the war" and "Down with the Tsar." By late afternoon, women and teenagers were breaking into food shops. There were so many reports of this happening that authorities were unable to control the havoc. By nighttime, there were between 80 and 90,000 workers in the street. Throughout the day, only a few strikers were harmed or arrested by the police, and by 7 that night, the police had finally gained control of the situation and cleared the streets. No one had predicted that after that day, there would be more riots during the days that followed. But they were wrong. The angered people of Petrograd weren't finished, nor would they be for a while. By the next day, half of Petrograd's workers were on strike, and they wanted to prove their points and gain control. This enormous demonstration would lead to the fall of Russian monarchies. This one day would forever change Russia's history.
The importance and views of women has changed drastically throughout the years. Women have a say in what happens in their lives and in their countries. Our society has become to the point where we are treated as equals to men. There are some cases, though, where men are still favored. In certain parts of the world, women are thought to be worthless except for reproducing and cleaning, like in the Middle East. The celebration of International Women's Day takes place all over the world and is celebrated in many ways. Women have stood up for what they believe in all around the world, and it finally paid off.